So for anyone who has not joined before or is tuning in for the replay for the first time, our Coping for Skeptics sessions is just a session that we do every Tuesday where we go through a really sort of accessible coping tool. And some of them are very specific to grief. Some of them are general mental health tools. Some of them are somewhere in between. And I guess, most important thing about them that brings them together is they're things that you can hopefully, if it feels like it's relevant to you and where you are right now in your life and in your grief, something that you can try to integrate right away. They're not complicated things. They maybe, that doesn't mean they're easy. Some of them certainly require a lot of us internally and mentally and emotionally, but in terms of learning what they are, understanding them, and putting them into practice, hopefully you find them to be accessible. And if it's not one that's right for you right now, they're always there in recording, so you can come back to them at a time that they feel more relevant. Today's tool, I labeled Making Space for Joy, and I put joy in brackets when I posted this because it might not be joy for you. Joy is sort of an example. I think it's a good and common example, but it's certainly not the only example of things in grief that we sometimes really have some blocks and barriers and struggles figuring out how to access. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. One of them, when it's a word like joy, it can feel very far away. It can feel like it's just sort of not something right now that feels close or accessible for you. And so it might be another word that feels a little closer to where you are. Joy for some people is actually just a word that they never necessarily resonate with. We all have, language is different for all of us. And so even before grief, some people, think about their times when they're happiest, through words like happiness or delight or euphoria, whatever words you think of. Maybe it is things that are a little more subdued, like connection or independence, ease, any number of things. I guess I just say this to say that today I'm going to be using the word joy as the default, but please do not feel like that is the word that you need to use, or that is even the emotion that you need to use. You may feel like you're in a place where that isn't the challenge. Maybe what is the challenge is something like connection. Maybe you've been feeling really isolated and really disconnected, and you have been accessing moments of joy but really struggling to have moments of connection. So this is really for any emotion or experience that you feel like you're disconnected from, or that you're struggling with, and that you want to kind of invite back into your life alongside of your grief, and as your grief evolves and changes. So a good place to start with this, I'm going to talk about kind of several pieces, but before I even talk about those, one of the barriers that we can have to accessing all sorts of different emotions and experiences is we have certain ideas about what it will mean if we access those experiences and those emotions again, especially if they are something that has felt really far away in grief. So it can be helpful to start by just asking yourself certain questions. What would it say about me if I felt joy again? What would it say about my grief if I felt joy? What would it say about my past if I felt joy? What would it say about my future if I felt joy? What would it say about my loved one if I felt joy? These are not the only an exhaustive list of questions to help you reflect on this, but it is a place to start in just considering whether there are some internal thoughts and beliefs that are maybe making it harder to open up to or make space for certain emotions and experiences after loss. So, starting there, then I want to move into kind of this three-part process of making space for something or opening up to something. Again, whatever language works for you. This is adapted from Alexandra L's book, How We Heal, which looks at lots of different approaches, kind of to bite-sized approaches to things like journaling and meditation and other expression tools for all types of healing, not just grief related, but just all sorts of healing. And in this piece of making space, she talks about three pieces of the process that are important to making that space. First, giving ourselves permission. Second, she has a letter to process that we'll talk about. And then an openness meditation, or having some openness. It could, if you resonate with the idea of mantras, if you resonate with the idea of meditation, anything like that, if those aren't things that you connect with, it can even just be kind of like statements that reaffirm this process. So the first step in this is just the step of giving myself permission. And if I'm thinking overall that I'm sort of giving myself permission to experience joy, to experience connection, to, experience whatever it is that you may be trying to open yourself to in your grief, there are sometimes other things below that it's helpful to give ourselves permission to do that will maybe make it easier to access that other emotion or experience. So some of the ones that Alexandra L suggests in giving ourselves permission is giving ourselves permission to not know what's next. I give myself permission to change my mind. I give myself permission to try new things. I give myself permission to prioritize my happiness. I give myself permission to try something, fail, and get back up. I give myself permission to cherish small, joyful moments. I give myself permission to pursue creative activities that make me happy. This is a short list of ideas. But of course, what is going to be most helpful and relevant to you is to create the list of permissions that feels most appropriate for you. So there may be other things as you thought about, some of your beliefs around these things, or some of the other barriers that may be there, certain things that it would help you to reinforce to yourself that you're kind of giving yourself permission to do in your grief that may bring you a little bit closer to that emotion or experience that you're feeling. The next piece of this that she mentions is to write a letter to invite, and again, I'm using joy as the example, to invite joy back in, or whatever it is that maybe we're trying to access again or open ourselves up to again. So she describes this process of starting it out, thinking of this as writing a letter to directly to joy, or to connection, or to whatever, creativity, to whatever it is that you're kind of inviting back in. um, and you may be someone who you need no prompts whatsoever. Like, as soon as you write dear joy, dear creativity, dear connection, you're off to the races. If you're not, that's okay. I created some prompts here that might help you to think about what a letter like that might include. The important piece of it is to conceptualize it as something that is inviting this back in, is making space for it, is thinking about reconnecting with it. But then that it is useful to have any sort of other reflection that feels important. So here you can see, Dear Joy, I am looking forward to seeing you again. Without you, life has kind of filling in whatever comes to you there. Sometimes it feels like, sometimes I worry that, thank you for, all of these things kind of coming back to the whatever that emotion or experience is. And give yourself time and flexibility with this. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to go through all those prompts. It doesn't have to take any specific shape. But the idea is just to sort of reflect on what it has looked like and felt like and been like to feel far away from or disconnected from a certain experience, what some of those worries may be, what some of the thoughts and fears are that are coming up, and what some of the gratitude is for our past experience with that emotion. And that, again, that reinforcing that openness that we have to hopefully reconnecting with it again. And then the last piece of this that she suggests is the meditation, or, kind of mantra, or whatever feels like it works for you, kind of reinforcement to that openness, if that idea of, we want to be open to exploring things and receiving, things when they come, and noticing them when they're there, and being, not having barriers within ourselves that cut us off from things like, connection, or joy, or ease, or creativity, whatever it is. So thinking about what are some things that, reinforce to you where you are or where you want to be with this. I'm not rushing, right? Going through this practice and this process of trying to open ourselves up to something doesn't mean that we're forcing anything or demanding it, or that we're going to judge ourselves if this is not a light switch that magically moves us back into the world of connection or creativity or joy. But a reminder that I'm not rushing. I'm opening myself up, right? I'm receiving. That doesn't mean I'm rushing. I don't have to see light at the end of the tunnel to be open to it, right? The idea that sometimes we we cannot imagine the path of how we will get there, right? We have an idea that we would love to be able to feel connection again, or creativity, or joy, but we really don't know how we're going to get there. And we really might not even feel authentically at the place that we're sure we are going to get there. But I think any sort of meditation or statement or mantra or reminder that you need to be able to say that we can be open even when we don't know what the path looks like, even if we can't picture where we might end up or what that could look like, we can still have an openness to that. I can hold both my joy and my grief, or whatever else this is. Sometimes we recognize that one of our barriers in grief is that we worry that we are trying to sort of bypass our difficult emotions, or we are have a fear that we're going to rush our grief, or that we're trying to move on or let go. And hopefully, if you've been here in this hub or been around What's Your Grief long enough, you have heard our many other mantras and reminders, right? That we can absolutely be finding ways to connect with joy and connect with all of these other areas and still keep an incredible continued bond to the person and people we've lost, and that it is not that we can hold two things at the same time. We can hold two truths at the same time. We can hold our joy and our grief alongside of one another. It is not that one is there to erase the other, but that we're able to hold both. And I think with this can be the idea of the next mantra, right? I can grow as I heal. And when we conceptualize our grief as what the Lois Tonkin, famously Lois Tonkin's growing around grief concept talks about, is this idea that we, in early grief, we sometimes think, okay, what's going to happen is my grief is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And what she talks about is the idea that sometimes our grief stays the exact same size, the pain stays the same size, but our life can begin to grow around it, and that we become more full and we're able to hold more things again and begin to rebuild and restore as we grow around our grief. And so I think when we consider this idea, any sort of mantra or statement or meditation or reminder that you need, that we can grow as we heal. And sometimes that means we're growing around our grief. This is, of course, also not an exhaustive list. What is going to be the most important for having a reminder or a meditation or a mantra that you carry is to find what works for you and to use what works for you. So that might mean writing your own that looks completely different than some of the examples that are here. There are no rules to this, but this is just kind of the to give you some ideas on what some of these might look like. So this is the kind of the simple process of this coping tool is, really these three pieces of making space for whatever it is you want to open up to, giving yourself the permission, writing a letter to whatever it is that you're opening yourself up to again, and then creating a mantra or meditation or reminder to try to help you connect and ground and to reinforce this thing as you move forward. So I would love, we'll post the recording and the slides. As always, if you give this a try, would love to know how it feels for you, to love to know what you are trying to make space for and working on. So please feel free to post that in the comments when the recording is up, or if you're here now, you can post in the chat if this has already sparked a thought on what you may want to open yourself up to. And keep in mind, as I said, that this may not feel like something that resonates for you right now. If you're very early in grief, the idea of opening up to anything might feel far away. There is a reason that in early grief we kind of cocoon and just try to protect ourselves and try to use some of our sadness to tend to our immediate needs, and just try to sometimes figure out how to keep getting up in the morning. So it may feel like this is too far away, but thinking about how you can just introduce this as a tool, even as you're just starting to open just small things again. And then maybe it builds over time to making space for bigger things, making space for hope or meaning or joy or things that feel like they're larger. But there's no rush with any of these things. So thanks so much to everyone for tuning in. Oh, yes. Melanie, absolutely. The book Bittersweet by Susan Cain, I think, is such a wonderful, it's a great book, and it does so much in thinking about the idea that an authentic human life is often always this intermingling, this constant holding of joy and grief. And often it may be smaller losses until we face huge losses and grief, but that there is this just sort of ongoing intermingling of the two, and that it isn't that one takes away from the other, that we can feel both things wholly at the same time. The concept of dialectical thinking, which we've talked about in so many spaces, is so important for this. I think it's remembering that, in dialectical thinking, we can hold two truths that sometimes feel contradictory to each other, and that oftentimes we bring those together for synthesis that on the surface feels really kind of counterintuitive and hard to understand, but that can be so important. So thanks for sharing that, because Bittersweet is a great recommendation. And I hope everyone has a nice rest of the day. And if this, again, is something that ends up really speaking to you this week and you give it a go, please come back around and let us know. Oh, Joan, that's a great idea. A book club of truth. Oh, I'm so behind. I was, for anybody who knows, I had been trying to coordinate a speaker for doing the Grieving Brain as the book club, and that has been very held up. But this is a good reminder that we do need to get a book club book posted. So, yeah, maybe Bittersweet would be a great choice, because it is a really, yeah, it's a great book. And Susan Cain, for anybody who doesn't know and interested, she wrote the book Quiet, which is a book which was sort of a really huge bestseller book about introverts and introversion, and really kind of going beyond just the surface of what people, like, sometimes misconceptions about what it is to be an introvert, but also thinking about the implications in society. And it's something that I really appreciate that book, but that we think, certainly thinking about our dispositions in so many ways in grief is so important. Like, if we're an introvert or an extrovert, if we are an optimist or a pessimist, it's an instrumental griever versus an intuitive griever. So much of that shapes our grief. So that's another wonderful Susan Cain book. But no, good suggestion on maybe posting that for the book club, and a reminder that I need to get something posted for that. All right, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and talk to everyone soon. And I'm